Hello and welcome to part 2 of my Caverna video series. In part 2 I'm going to show you exactly what the game looks like when it's played. I'm going to actually try to show you at least half of a game. I'm going to show you a 3-player game, and I actually got the board set for a 3-player game right now. My hope is that I can get at least to round 6 and still be able to do that in 45 minutes or less. That way this video doesn't drag on too long. But I definitely want to take some time to explain to you exactly what's going on when I'm taking the action so you understand the logic behind it, because it's going to help you understand exactly how Caverna plays better just by watching that. So like I said, I got the game set for a 3-player game. Purple is going to be player number 1. Have everything ready, and we are ready to begin round number 1 of Caverna. But before we begin, just a quick reminder, remember that all the harvest tokens have to be randomized and set up on the board face down so you don't know which ones are red and green tokens. The action cards are all shuffled up so you don't know in what order they're going to come. Again, that's a limited randomizer. There's always going to get the 1 cards before the 2s, the 2s before the 3s, etc. Player 1 starts off with 1 food, player 2 starts off with 2 food, player 3 starts off with 2 food, and if we have more than 3 players, each additional player for the rest of the players would get 3 food apiece. So player 1, 1 food, player 2, 1 food, player 3, 2 food, everybody else would get 3 food. We're playing a 3-player game though, purple versus red versus yellow, and we can begin. The very first thing we do in every round is phase number 1, which will allow us to reveal the very first harvest token if we happen to have a harvest token in the round we're currently in. We don't, because we are playing round number 1. So the first thing we need to do is we need to draw the top card of the action deck and see what action card is going to be added to the action board. So we draw the first action card to see what action card we're going to get, and we are going to go ahead and get the sheep farming action card. This is going to be a resource space that we're going to have to fill up every single round during phase number 2. And it's also going to allow us to build fences for a price, and it's also going to allow us to build stables for a price. And again, we're also going to get sheep anytime we visit that action space. That ends phase number 1. We now move on to phase number 2, which is a replenishment phase where we need to refill all the action spaces that have a circle and an arrow with them. And remember, most of the time it's going to be on the top, but the sheep farming and the donkey farming space happen to have that symbol on the bottom, so don't miss it. Don't forget it. Remember, this is a space that does replenish it because it is replenishing space. So we'll start with the first space here. We'll see that we're going to get 1 coal here. We're going to get 1 rock, 1 rock, 1 food. In a 3 or more player game, you always start with 1 ruby during the very first round. If you're playing a 2-player game, you don't put rubies here till the 3rd round, but we're playing a 3-player game, so we're okay there. We're going to go and fill up this space with 1 sheep. This one's going to get 3 wood because there's no wood currently there, so there's no wood, it gets 3. If there happens to be any wood there, you're only going to add 1 wood to that space. This is a supply space. Anytime somebody lands there, they're going to get all those supplies there. We're going to add 2 coal to this space. This space is going to get 1 wood, and 1 wood. So we just need to grab 3 more wood onto our supply board here. This space gets 1 food. And that's going to end the end of the replenishment phase. We now get to move on to phase number 3. So for the start of phase number 3 of round number 1, the first person to go is going to be the purple player. They're simply going to take their dwarf and they're going to decide which one of these action spaces they're going to go ahead and take advantage of. Purple has a strategy that they're working on because they know round 4 is going to be the first round that anybody in the game is going to get a chance to get additional dwarves by using the Wish for Children space, and that's the first time that any of that location is going to pop up. So players know during the first 3 rounds they're going to be basically spending as much time as they can getting the resources in the hopes that eventually they'll be able to start adding workers to their workforce, but they're just going to require them to add extra dwellings. So purple's general strategy that they're going to be using for is trying to get an extra dwelling by phase or round number 4 so they can get the extra dwarven workers and start taking care of those spaces. So with that logic, purple is going to go ahead and take this space over here, which is going to give them 3 wood. And the reason why they want 3 wood is they're looking at these dwelling spaces that cost anywhere from 3 all the way up to 8 wood, plus some stone, but at least that'll allow them to get an extra dwarf when that time finally does come up. Purple players place the dwarf. The action space is actually double action space. It's going to tell you to take wood and then or go on an adventure. Unfortunately, this dwarf is not equipped with a weapon, so he cannot go on an adventure. So that's the only thing that purple dwarf can do. That ends the purple player's turn. We now get to move on to the red player's turn. The red player's turn, they're going to take one of their dwarves, and they're going to go ahead and take the supply space because they know supplies are wonderful. They only start with 1 food, and they need to have at least 4 food by the time we make it to the end of round number 3, because that's our first harvest. That's the first time we need to feed our dwarves, so we need to have at least 4 food in reserve by the end of round number 3. So we're going to take the supply space, which is going to give us 1 wood, 1 stone, 1 coal, 1 food, and 2 gold. That's going to be the end of the red player's turn. We're now going to move on to the yellow player's turn, and they need to decide what kind of strategy they want to work towards. The yellow player is also considering their future food needs and also knowing that by the end of round 3, they also need to have 4 food. They're lucky they're starting with only 2 food, so they don't have as much of a food crisis yet, but they definitely want to at least get the food reserves for when you get the chance to start adding extra dwarves to their team. So they definitely want to start at least stockpiling food in some way. So the yellow strategy is they're going to try to get a farm going so they start gaining the food resources and get that food engine built. So when the later stages of the game come in, they're not hurting for food and they have a larger variety of options with their possible actions. So having said that, yellow player is going to go ahead and use the sustenance space, which is going to allow them to take any food at this location. That's going to put them at 3 food, almost meeting the requirement they're going to need for round number 3. They're also going to get 1 bushel of hay, or grain, whatever you want to call it. And then they're going to get 1 of these double action spaces that's going to give them a field and a meadow. Now remember, anytime you add 1 of these spaces to your board, it has to connect immediately to the entrance and the exit to your little hovel, your little cave here. So we're going to go ahead and place this down on the board. Now we have a couple different options on how we can place this. We're actually going to place it directly like this so we cover the +1 food spot. And the reason why we're doing that is 2 reasons. One, as long as we place it like this, we have the potential to add extra tiles. That's going to allow us to connect the meadows. Now remember, you need meadows that are connected to get the larger pastures, and the larger your pasture is, the more animals you can keep inside that pasture. So we want to keep our meadows aligned, so that's part of our plan. And the other reason why we're going to do it this way is anytime you cover a square that has a +1 food, a +2 food, or a pig resource, you're actually going to gain that resource immediately. So since we're covering the +1 food, we're going to get 1 free food resource. That's going to go ahead and put us at 4 food resources. And the yellow player is actually already set for the first 3 rounds of the game. We're now back to the purple player's turn. Now remember, purple has a bit of a plan on exactly what they want to do, so it's pretty easy to figure out what we're going to do with the purple player. We need stone, we need wood, so we can build that dwelling like we're thinking about, so we can eventually get that extra dwarf added to our workforce, which is going to give us more actions every single turn, so we know we need stone. This space right here is going to be the better stone space because it's going to give us a stone resource, and we're going to get to add a cavern tile, and we get to choose which side of the cavern tile we want to lay out. Going to give us a slight benefit, and we're actually planning for some of the future dwellings that we want to add to the board. And we're thinking about a specific dwelling that if we play it in a certain way, it's going to give us a lot of extra victory bonus points. So we're going to take the double cavern side tile. We're going to place it on the board like this. And the reason why we're going to do this is we want to cover the +1 food to help us with our food problem that we know we need to have covered by the end of round 3. And additionally, we want to keep our caverns together with the hopes of getting a special furnishing tile that's going to give us some extra bonuses by keeping our caverns organized together. So we place our tile, we get 1 free food because we did cover the food spot on the board here. That's going to bring us up to 2 food. That's going to end the purple player's turn, and actually that's going to end the purple player's actions for this round because they have no more dwarves to work with. We now get to move on to the red player. The red player is also thinking about their future food needs. Now the red player isn't doing too bad. They actually have 2 food. And they also happen to have 2 gold. 2 gold can be used to buy 1 food, so they actually only need 1 more food. But we don't want to spend our gold like that because each gold we have at the end of the game is worth 1 victory point. Whereas food, unless you buy the right furnishing location, any food you have left over at the end of the game isn't worth any points. So it would be smart for us to try to save our gold as long as possible instead of wasting gold on buying just plain old food. So using that thought process, red is going to go ahead and start working towards getting that food engine going for themselves, which means they need to start building up their farms. And, you know, wood could always come in handy. It can always be used for buying dwellings and for other things. So it's a pretty efficient use of their turn. Probably not optimally what they want to do, but it's a decent move. So they get the 1 resource that's on the square, and then they get to add a field and meadow space onto the board. Remember, it has to be connected to their entrance and exit from their little cavern here. And we need to place it in a way that's legal as long as it's connected to that. We're going to go ahead pretty much and almost exactly copy what the yellow player did. just by spinning around a little bit differently though. And we're going to place it over the space. That's also going to give us a free food. So that'll help us out working towards the food we need by the end of round number 3 when the harvest comes out. So we now have 3 food, and we only need 1 more by the end of round number 3. That's our last dwarf we have. That's the end of the red player's turn. We now move to the yellow player who gets to place their last dwarf on the board. Now the yellow player realizes that starving is for the birds, and they definitely have a plan that they're going to get started to get their food engine going early, quickly, and as efficiently as they can. So they're going to take their 1 dwarven worker. They're going to go out to this space right here, which is give them the wood. Again, wood is always nice to get for the dwellings, but this space is also going to give us 1 pumpkin. And pumpkins are great because not only can we sow them in our fields by using the action that's going to allow us to do that, they also can be used to feed our families because 1 pumpkin is worth 2 food. So 1 pumpkin can feed 1 dwarf. We now have effectively enough food to feed 3 dwarves. So the yellow player is doing really good right now. That's the end of the yellow player's turn. That's the end of all of our players' turns. That ends phase 3. We now move to phase 4, where all the players simply just take all the dwarves back, put them back on their dwellings, and that's going to end phase number 4, which goes rather quickly. We now move on to phase number 5, which would be the harvest phase. But if we have to look at the board in case we ever forget, it's going to tell us the end of round number 1. There's going to be no harvest, so there's no phase 5 at the end of round number 1. So that's the end of round number 1. We now move to round number 2. Nobody took the starting player space, so on round number 2, purple gets to be player number 1 all over again. So for round number 2, we start off from the beginning, moving with phase number 1. If we had a harvest token, we'd reveal it. There is none since we're still only in round number 2. So we're simply going to flip over the top card and see what action space gets added to the board. The action space added to the board is the blacksmithing space, so all of our players need to start thinking quickly about what strategies they want to use because adventurers can be very profitable, especially if you happen to be the only dwarf going after them. We now move on to phase number 2 of round number 2, which means we need to start refilling all the refillable action spaces. So starting with the top left corner, normally it says to add a coal to the space. Unless there's already a coal there, then we're simply going to add rocks only. So we'll add a rock to this space, add a rock to this space, rock here. This space is going to get another food, bringing it up to 2 food. We add a ruby to this space, bringing that up to 2 rubies. The sheep farming space gets another sheep, making this a better spot for any player who wants to take it. This space again is empty, so it's actually going to get 3 wood instead of only 1 wood, making it also a very lucrative space for any player who wants to go there. This space says add 2 coal unless there's already coal there, then you're only going to add 1 coal instead. None of these spaces are going to refill. You're going to add 1 wood, 1 wood, 1 wood, and 1 food. And we're now done refilling all the action spaces. That's the end of phase number 2. We now move on to phase number 3, where all the players get to take their actions. Again, starting with the purple player, who happens to still be the starting player. Starting with the purple player, we know what the goal is for the purple player. They're trying to build a dwelling which takes 4 wood and 3 stone. We only have 3 wood and 1 stone, so we know we need to get some stone pretty darn quickly so we can get that extra dwelling, so we can start getting ready to buy that extra dwarf when we get that opportunity during round number 4. So using that logic, purple is going to go ahead and spend 1 dwarf, and then go ahead and go over here and do some drift mining. Now they had the option of course, doing this space, which would have given them only 1 stone, but then they could have won a cavern or a cavern tunnel. Instead, they go and do the cavern tunnel side, but that's actually okay for a purple player at this point. So they're going to take the 3 stone, they're going to add the tile to the board, and that's the end of the purple player's turn. We didn't cover anything, so we're not going to get any free resources. So again, that's the end of the purple player's turn. We're now going to move on to the red player's turn. The red player is thinking about going down the path of the dwarven adventurer, so they want to start getting some levels and some weapons, so they start getting some of the free resources from being an adventurer. That means that red player needs some coal, so it's pretty obvious what they're going to go ahead and do. They actually have 2 options right now. We only have 3 food, and we know we're going to need some food pretty darn quickly, so we could come here, become the new starting player, get some food, and get 2 coal. Unfortunately, that's not fitting our plan, what we want to do. We actually want to start with a weapon level of 3. So we're going to go to this space right here, which allows us to take the 3 coal, to add to our resources, which is going to give us a total of 4 coal, which is going to be perfect for what we plan on doing. That's going to end the red player's turn. We're now going to move over to the yellow player's turn, who also has an idea of how they're going to start building their farm and start getting their food resources starting right here and right now. Yellow player is going to take their action, and they're going to do the slash and burn action, which is going to allow them to add a field and a meadow to the board, which they're simply going to place out like this. They're not covering anything, so they're not going to get any free resources, but they do have an additional action which allows them to sow their fields. Luckily, we happen to have one vegetable, and we also happen to have some wheat, so we're going to go ahead and sow those, and whenever you do that, you're basically going to add 1 extra pumpkin if you happen to sow with pumpkin, and if you sow with wheat, you get to add 2 extra wheat to the board. And then when the harvest comes around, we're going to get 1 pumpkin and 1 wheat back, which is enough to make 3 food, which is definitely going to handle all of our food crises that could happen early in the game. So the yellow player is actually looking pretty darn set pretty early in the game. We now move back to the purple player's turn, who has a couple of options of what they want to do. They know they need at least 1 wood right now to buy a dwelling because they have 3 stone and 3 wood, and the dwelling that's most efficient for us. We could always get the lower cost supply-wise dwellings, but they're going to give us 0 victory points. If we go for this dwelling that we're 1 wood away, that's going to give us at least 3 victory points, so we know that's looking much better for us, especially since we have 3 wood and we happen to have 3 stone. So we have a couple options. We can go this space, which is going to give us 3 wood, putting us at 6 wood, which is kind of tempting. We may be wanting to get one of these mixed dwellings or maybe something that may be a little bit better for us. But we're thinking about our current food crisis that we're slowly working towards. If we want to have the dwellings to get the extra dwarf, we're going to need the food. So, since we only have 2 food, which is really only enough to feed 1 dwarf, let alone the 3 that we plan on having by the end of round 4, we need to look at a way to get some extra food. So our decision is going to be pretty easy for us. We're going to take this space right here, which is only going to give us 1 wood, which is enough to cover what we're going to need. But the bonus is we're going to go ahead and get 1 pumpkin. And remember, 1 pumpkin is worth 2 food, and we now have enough food to feed our 2 dwarves during the harvest at the end of round number 3. That is the end of the purple player's turn. They're actually out of dwarves, so they won't be able to take any more actions this round. We now move to the red dwarf, who's going to go on a little bit of an adventure. Our red dwarf is going to go ahead and go on an adventure, and they're going to go ahead and get their first weapon. Now they can make their weapon anywhere from level 1 to level 4 because we happen to have 4 coal in our supply. We plan on making a level 4 weapon because that's why we got the 4 coal, and the reason why is so we can get the specific resources we're looking for. So we're going to spend all 4 of our coal, and we're going to go ahead and blacksmith and forge our very first mighty dwarven weapon. And since we spent 4 coal, it is going to be a level 4 weapon. Now that we got our weapon, we can actually go on an expedition and start getting some nice, wonderful resources. Since we have a level 4 weapon, we can get up to 3 resources as long as they're level 4 or less, giving us access to quite a few things. The first thing we're going to take is we're going to take the pumpkin, and that's going to help us with our food resources that we're going to be needing pretty darn soon, especially at the end of the next round. That's going to give us a total of 5 food, so we're definitely covering the food we're going to be needing. The next thing we're going to take is we're going to take 2 coal. Now the reason why we're taking the 2 coal is because we want our other dwarf to become armed next round. And he's going to need some coal to forge his weapon, so we definitely want the coal to do that. And that's our second reward we've taken. We now have 1 more reward we can take. Well, we're thinking about either breeding, so maybe we'll take the sheep, or we're possibly thinking about raising our weapon level, and that's actually what we're going to do. It says right here, after the expedition, all weapons will go up by +1. Now remember, that's in addition to the fact that we're going to gain a +1 weapon for going on the expedition in the first place. So if we pick that bonus, this is going to go from a level 4 to a level 6 weapon at the end of this adventure, which is definitely what we're looking for because level 6 weapons can start bringing home the gold. So for our third reward, we're going to take +1 to weapons, and since we're done with our adventuring, we can go ahead and take advantage of that right now. We're going to get +1 weapon for surviving the adventure, not that you can ever lose the adventure. That would put us at +5. And then we're going to get 1 more because of the reward we took that says after the expedition, all weapons go up by 1 level. So at the end of this adventure, we're going to spend 4 coal, and we're going to walk away with a level 6 weapon, a little bit of pumpkin, and a little bit of coal, and we're ready to go on to the next round with the red player. Yellow still has one action left over though. Let's see what the yellow player decides to do on their turn. Well, yellow's got their farming hat on, so they're thinking with their farming eyes, and they're thinking of a good way to get that food engine going, and they know exactly what they need. They know they need wood, so they can go ahead and build a fence, so they can start fencing some of these farm animals and start adding them to their wonderful farm here. We know we only have one wood. It does take 4 wood to do what we want to do, so we know exactly what we're going to do with our final dwarf. We're going to go out there and go chop down some trees, gaining 3 more wood, bringing us to a total of 4 wood. And unfortunately, since we're not armed with a weapon, we can't go on an expedition afterwards. So the only thing we can do is take the wood. That's the end of the yellow player's turn. And that's the end of all of our players' turns. We're done with phase number 3. We now move to phase number 4. Phase 4 is pretty quick and pretty simple. That's just basically where all of our dwarves come home after a nice hard day's work. And they're ready to put up their feet, kick back, relax, and do what dwarves do after a hard day's work. And that's the end of phase number 4. We now normally would move on to phase number 5, but if we look and if we ever forget, end of round 2, there is no harvest, so there will be no phase number 5 at the end of round 2. So that will effectively end round number 2. We're now going to move on to round number 3. And since nobody's taken the starting player action space, we know purple is still going to be the starting player. So back down to round number 3, phase number 1. The first thing we would do is reveal a harvest token if we're at one of those rounds. We're not there yet, so we need to flip over the top action card and see what the new action space is that's going to be added. Here's the thing we have to be very careful of though. We see a green token here, so we know at the end of round number 3 there will be a harvest, so our players need to plan for the harvest that will definitely happen this turn. The new action space we get added to the board is the mining construction, which allows us to start constructing mines and also go on additional adventures. So we now have a 1 adventure space, we have a 2 adventure space, and we now have a 3 adventure space, which red is really liking because they're going down the weapon path. It's now time to replenish all the spaces that need to be replenished. Stone, stone, stone. This space is going to get food. This space gets a ruby, and it's starting to look like a really wonderful space to take advantage of. And this space is going to get 3 sheep. We now move to the next space, which is this one, which is going to get 3 wood again. We're going to add 2 coal to this space since there's currently no coal in this space at all. None of these other spaces are replenishing spaces, so we're going to move over here. We're going to get 1 wood. 1 wood, another wood. This space gets a food, and that's the end of all the spaces that need to replenish. That's the end of phase 2. We now move to phase 3. Where all of our dwarves get to go to work. The purple player knows 2 things right now. 1, they know they want to lock in first place, so that way when round number 4 comes in, they get the first option to get the extra dwarf. The other thing they also know is they need to get a little back supply of food, so their decision what they're going to do is pretty easy for them. They're going to take this space right here, which is going to do 2 things. 1, it's going to allow them to guarantee that they're the starting player because there's only 1 space on the board that allows the starting player to change, and purple is now in control of that space. 2, it's going to give them additional food to help them for the future harvest. And 3, it's going to give them a little bit of coal, which is one of the resources that they don't possess yet. So for them, that's a good action space, at least at this time. That's the end of the purple player's turn. We now move to the red player. And now, remember, your dwarves with the weakest weapons are the ones you need to send out on your action cards first. So we can't use this dwarf first unless we spend a ruby. We don't have any rubies to spend. So we know that this dwarf has to go out first, which actually works out great for us because we know exactly what we want to do with this dwarf and where we want to send them. The red player sends out their dwarf to head out and head on and do some blacksmithing and make a weapon. Now we could spend just 1 coal if we wanted to, but we want one of the resources that require a level 2 weapon. So we're going to spend 2 of our coal, and we're going to go ahead and get a level 2 weapon to add to our dwarf. After we got our weapon, we now can go on an expedition, and remember we get to pick 3 rewards from this expedition as long as they're level 2 or less. Now the rewards we get for level 2 is a sheep, a wheat, a dog, a wood, or increase the weapon strength of all of our weapons by +1, which is going to help this dwarf and this dwarf. Now the trick with this ability is if you have a dwarf who's unarmed, it's not going to give him a level 1 weapon. It's only going to raise the strength of a weapon if a dwarf currently has a weapon. But since both of our dwarves are now armed, that's a great space and a great action for us to take. So we know that's going to be one of our three things. So at the end of this expedition, this weapon strength is going to go from a 6 to a 7. We know this will go from a 2 to a 4, because remember, he's going to get +1 for doing the expedition and +1 for using that ability. So now we just need to figure out what our other two resources are that we want to get out of this. Well, we're deciding that we want to get a little bit of food back up, and we know exactly what makes great food, and that happens to be sheep. So our first thing we're going to get is we're going to get a sheep, and we're going to add it over here to our dwelling. Now remember, this dwelling can hold one pair of animals, so we don't need a field yet. The second thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and get a dog. Now we're going to add the dog to the board here in this open meadow, and we're going to let the sheep go ahead with the dog, because one dog can watch one sheep without a fence, and now we have room for more animals if we like, so we're doing pretty darn good right there. And then for our third reward we need to take, again, is the weapon bonus. So at the end of this expedition, both of our weapons are going to go up. We now have 3 rewards. Our adventure is over, so we're going to go ahead and raise our weapons right now. The level 6 weapon is going to turn into a level 7 weapon because we took this one reward. And the level 2 weapon is going to turn into a level 3 weapon because we took this one reward. But remember, after every single adventure, no matter what results you take, the dwarf who went on the adventure is also going to go up 1 level. So we're going to go from a level 3 all the way up to a level 4. So at the end of the third round, we now have 2 dwarves who are very well armed. We have a level 7 dwarf and a level 4 dwarf. That's the end of the red player's turn. Now the yellow player has a couple different options available to him, but unfortunately the red players kind of force their hand on exactly what they can do. The yellow player knows that on the red player's next turn, they could take this space, take all the sheep, and have enough room for all the sheep on the board thanks to now having this dog, and also thanks to having the starting location every player starts with allows them to put 2 animals in this location. The dog could watch 2 sheep, and 2 sheep could go there, and the red player could after that even slaughter one of the sheep, and then when the harvest round, part of this round comes along, they're going to get 1 sheep back for free. Yellow player knows this, and yellow player wants to stop this from happening, or at least make red's life a little bit more difficult. So the yellow player is going to go ahead and take advantage of this space. 2 reasons they want to do this. They eventually want to build a fence anyways. It's just that they want to use another space first, but at least this doesn't mess up their plans too bad. So they can put their dwarf on this space for sheep farming. They are going to go ahead and spend 4 wood, which is going to allow them to build a fence for them to keep their wonderful sheep and prevent them from running away in the middle of the night. So since we spent 4 wood, we get to lay a double fence out across one of our meadow spaces, and that's going to give us 4 victory points at the end of the game. And now we get to lay claim to these 3 sheep. And remember, this fenced in area can hold up to 4 sheep, so we're actually okay. And when we get the harvest, we're going to end up getting a free sheep also. Yellow player is pretty happy. End of the yellow player's turn. Now back to the purple player. The purple player's turn is pretty easy for them. It's what they've been working for quite a while. They're going to go ahead and send out their last dwarf to go do some housework, which is going to give them a nice little dog. So it's nice to have an extra rover around the house, especially if you get some loose sheep. It can at least help keep them in tow. But the important thing is it's going to allow us to furnish a cavern. Now remember the difference between furnish a cavern and furnish a dwelling space. Furnish a cavern space allows you to take any tile. Furnish a dwelling space only allows you to take one of these orange dwelling spaces. Well, it doesn't really matter for us because either way we're going for a dwelling. And we're going to take this dwelling right here, which is going to give us room for 1 more dwarf when the time comes, if we're able to buy one. That's going to cost us 4 wood, which we can easily cover. It's also going to cost us 3 stone, which again we can easily cover. And not only that, it's going to give us 3 victory points at the end of the game. That is the end of the purple player's turn. They're set up and quite ready for round number 4. We now move to the red player, who has to change their plans after yellow messed up what they were trying to do to get those extra sheep to help protect them and help move their engine forward. The red player knows that they still want 1 sheep so they can take advantage of the harvest in this round, which is going to give them an extra sheep, because as long as we can manage to get a 2nd sheep before the harvest, and as long as we have room for it, and we do, we'll be able to breed those sheep and get a 3rd sheep by the end of this round. So using that logic, we know that the best thing to help us is to go on an adventure, because we are a level 7 adventurer and we can actually get some extra bonuses by doing this. So we know that we want to do the adventure space that's giving us the most adventures between the 1 and the 2. We can take the 1 and the 3 wood, which could be okay, but we're looking for the 2 because we actually have a plan. So we're going to send our dwarf over here, and it's going to say add a mining tile and then or go on an adventure. Well, we can't add a mining tile because we don't have the tunnels to support it. So the only thing we can do with this space is go on an adventure. And since we have 7 strength, we can pick 2 adventures as long as the strength is 7 or less. So the first thing we're actually going to do, and this has actually worked out quite well for us, is we're going to do a level 2 option, which is again extra sheep. That's the first reward we're going to get from our adventure, and we're going to go ahead and add that to our board. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to furnish a cavern. Now we can furnish a cavern as long as it's level 7. We got level 7, so we can go ahead and add a cavern to our board. What we're going to do is we're actually going to get a cavern that's going to help us start stockpiling resources for the later date. We're going to take the wood supplier and we're going to add to our cavern here. It's going to cost us 1 stone, but what this is going to do is it's going to give us 1 free wood every single round for the next 7 rounds. So the easiest way to do this is just to count out 7 pieces of wood and put them across the board, and just remember to grab them at the beginning of every single round from now on. So we have 7 wood, so we're going to place it on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And at the beginning of every single round, when one of these rounds come up, the red player gets to take that resource off the board and add it to their stockpile here. So eventually they're going to be able to afford one of these dwellings if they never get a hold of the dwelling space that's going to allow them to get extra dwarves. And if they ever get a nice stockpile of food, they should be set up pretty darn decently. And out of that, they also manage to get 2 victory points. Now we move to the yellow player. The yellow player is pretty darn good set for resources, especially since we got a harvest coming up pretty darn quickly. And they're thinking that they want to start expanding their cave. They're going to go ahead and take this space right here, which is going to give them more stone resources. Remember, stone and wood are used mainly to buy all your dwellings. You need stone and wood at the end of the game. Now, while stone and wood aren't really worth victory points unless you have a dwelling that's going to give it to you, you definitely need stone and wood to expand your cavern, so it's always good to have some of that on hand. So we're going to get the stone from this location, and now we're going to go ahead and get a tile. We can go ahead and take a tunnel cavern, or we can take a double cavern. We're actually going to take the tunnel cavern side of it because we're thinking that we want to start getting some mines, and we start mining deeply, possibly get some ruby mines, because you know those ruby cards are going to be coming up pretty darn quickly. We're going to lay it out like this, and the reason why we're doing this is because we want to cover that +1 food, because we want that food resource, because might as well get the food while we can now, and so we don't need it at a later date. That's the end of the yellow player's turn. That's the end of all of our players' turn. That ends phase 3 for all of our players, and all of our players need to pull their dwarves back, put them back in their dwellings, and we now can move on to phase 5, because this round happens to have a harvest in it, and that means we get to harvest for all of our players. So starting with the yellow player, because they're the actual person who's the only one who got to sow their crops this round, they get to take 1 resource from every single one of their fields that they have on the board. We happen to have 2 fields on the board, so we get 1 resource from each. We're going to get 1 pumpkin, and we're going to get 1 grain. The rest is going to stay on the fields for future rounds. None of the other players have anything to sow, so now we need to have all of our players feed their dwarves, and each dwarf is going to eat 2 food since we're having a standard harvest. That means the purple player has to discard 4 food, which they can afford. This does mean the red player needs to discard 4 food. Unfortunately, they only have 3 food, but we do happen to have a pumpkin which can be used for 2 food, so we will discard the pumpkin and 2 food, leaving us 1 food left. And then finally, the yellow player is doing really good. It's just going to discard 4 food, leaving them 1 food and some more resources that they can possibly sow in the fields in later rounds, so they can keep on working that engine and keep that food coming and coming and coming in, so they never have to worry about a food crisis. Now that everybody's fed all the dwarves, we need to worry about any of the animals possibly breeding. Purple doesn't have any animals to breed. The red player does have 1 animal to breed, and that's the sheep. We do have at least 2 of them, and we even have room for the sheep. And we actually have double the room. We can actually put them in 2 possible locations. Remember, dogs can watch as many sheep as there are in the same location +1, so 1 dog can watch 2 sheep. 5 dogs can watch 6 sheep. 20 dogs can watch 21 sheep. So we definitely put the sheep there. We could have also put it in our house, but let's keep the animals out of our house for now. We now move over to the yellow player who has at least 2 sheep, and we have the room for it. So we're going to add 1 more sheep to our board, bringing us to 4 sheep, and our wonderful pasture here can definitely hold 4 sheep. That's the max it can hold, at least until we get a stable built in it, which will double its capacity. That does end round number 3. We're now ready for round number 4. We're actually already 25% of the way through the game already. We need to start round number 4 again. Purple is still going to be player number 1 because they still have their player 1 pawn. Nobody's been able to take it from them. So we're going to start with phase 1 of round 4. The first thing we need to do is reveal a harvest token if there is one. Again, we don't get a harvest token to round number 6. Next thing we're going to do is red's going to go ahead and get their free wood that they get from having this wonderful dwelling, which is going to stockpile for them a little bit. And then we get to add the action card to its action space. The card that's going to be added, and this is always the card that's added in round 4. It never fails. Every time you play the game, the round 4 card is always going to be the Wish for Children card. Basically, that means that if anybody places a dwarf there, you're going to add another dwarf on top, as long as you have the dwelling for the dwarf. If you don't have the dwelling for the dwarf, then you have to do the furnish a dwelling action, or you can't use the space at all. We're done with phase 1. We now move to phase number 2, where we get to replenish all of our supply spaces. Simply throw out the rock on these spaces, the food, the ruby. Since this space already has wood on it, it's only going to get 1 instead of getting 3 more wood. Since this one already has coal on it, instead of getting 2 coal, it's only going to get 1 coal. Gotta remember to replenish this space with the sheep right here before I forget. We now move over here. We're going to get wood on the space, and wood. 1 more food. Phase 2 is done. We now move to phase 3, and the purple player is the first player. Now, purple is actually in no rush to take the Wish for Children space, technically, because they know that no other player could get that Wish for Children space because nobody has a dwelling. But the other players can actually cheat them out of that space if they use the space just for dwelling only. And the other 2 players, well, red can't, but at least yellow could definitely buy a dwelling, and they could definitely use that space just to cheat purple out of that action space. So purple really doesn't actually have a good decision at this point. They can try to gamble, not take that space yet, and go for one of these nice resource spaces, and then they take that risk of yellow taking that space away from them, or then take that space now, and that's exactly what the purple player is going to do. They're going to put their dwarf out there and add another dwarf, which is going to come back, bringing them to 3 workers at the end of this round. Now remember, at the end of this round, we need to feed every one of our dwarves 1 food, whether they're newborn or not. So we need to have at least 3 food at the end of this round, otherwise we're going to suffer those negative victory points at the end of the game. Luckily, we do have a pumpkin, which is worth 2 food, and we do have 1 food off to the side, but that's not enough leeway for us. So we need to figure out a way to start getting some extra food and start supplying some food for the future rounds. Purple's turn is over. It's now up to the red player. And remember, red has to move his dwarf with the weakest weapon first, so the level 4 dwarf has to perform an action before the level 7 dwarf does, unless we spend a ruby. Unfortunately, we don't have any rubies, but that's okay because we're actually going to go ahead and get some rubies because rubies have a lot of positive benefits. A ruby is basically a wild card which can be used for almost anything in the game. And not only that, rubies are one of the easiest ways in the game to get cattle because there's actually no action card space that allows cattle. There's an action card space for donkeys, there's an action card space for sheep, but there's not one from cattle. The only way you can get cattle in this game is by going on a level 10 adventure or by spending 1 ruby plus 1 food to buy cattle itself. So that's the way we're planning, because remember, at the end of the game, if you don't have 1 of every animal in your farm, you are going to lose victory points at the end of the game. It's now the yellow player's turn, and yellow always planning for the future, knowing they need to get a dwelling eventually so they get that dwarf, and also knowing that they want to get a couple more fields, because we definitely have some extra crops to use for sowing. They have a plan. What they're going to go ahead is have one of their dwarves head out and start doing some clearing. This is going to do 2 things. One, that's going to give them the wood, 3 wood closer to the dwelling they need. They actually are just about close enough to buy the dwelling. They'll need 1 wood and 1 stone. It's also going to allow them to put out another field, and meadow space, which is going to do two things. One, it's going to allow them to get the boar, which they definitely have the room for, and it's going to give them a space when they start planting more crops to get more food for later turns. So the first thing that's going to happen is, since we cover the square that gives us the pig or the boar, we actually have to take the pig. Now, we do need to have a place for the pig, and luckily he can stay in our dwelling there, although I wouldn't recommend having pigs inside your house, especially wild boar, but hey, they're dwarves, they're kind of crazy like that. It's now the purple player's turn, who's feeling a little bit of pressure from the food necessity that they're not feeling like they're meeting the requirements for. So purple decides that they're going to go ahead and get some food, and this is going to give them two benefits. One is going to start allowing them to open up their field or their farm here, so they start planting some crops. Luckily, the space also gives them crops. It's also going to allow them to get some extra food by placing the tiles in a special way that's going to benefit them the most. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we get all the food off that location and the wheat. We're going to lay the tile down, and we're going to lay it down like this so we cover up the +1 food. So we do get the free food there. That's going to put us at 5 food. So we're going to be ready to end this round with a limited harvest that happens at the end of this round. For the red player's turn, they're going to go ahead and slaughter one of their sheep because they know they have at least 2 sheep left over. And they know that means that they're going to get a free sheep when the harvest phase comes around, and they also happen to be needing food at this point. The red player is then going to go ahead and spend their last dwarf and send them out here. Now remember, they're using the blacksmithing space, but they can't actually spend coal to modify the weapon at all, because a dwarf will never give up their weapon that they've been given. So this top half of the card is going to be ignored, and we're just going to go on the adventure, and we're going to go ahead and get 3 rewards. The first reward we're going to take is going to be the level 5 reward, which is going to be for the pig. And we're going to add that pig to our house because we do have room inside our house for the pig. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a pumpkin, because a pumpkin is worth 2 food, and we definitely know we're going to be needing food very, very quickly. And then the third thing we're going to do is after the expedition, all weapons are going to go up 1 level. And by all weapons, that means all weapons for all of my armed dwarves. Luckily, both my dwarves are armed. And since that's my 3rd reward, I can go ahead and finish my expedition now. This level 4 weapon is going to become a level 5 weapon. This level 7 weapon is going to become a level 8 weapon. And since we finished the expedition, we're actually done with the expedition. At the end of every single expedition, don't forget your dwarf who went on the expedition also gains 1 weapon level. At the end of the 4th round for the red player, we now have a level 9 weapon and a level 5 weapon. And a level 9 weapon is actually pretty darn powerful. It can give us a lot of wonderful things, including tunnels, single tunnels that we start using to fill up our cavern with. That's the end of the red player's turn. We now move to the yellow player's turn, who's going to do a very quick and easy action to get a better farm. Now the yellow player knows at the end of this round they need to have at least 2 food, 1 food for every single dwarf they have. They only have 2 dwarves, so they know they need 2 food at the end of this round. Because it says pay 1 food per dwarf at the end of this round, there is no harvest at the end of this round. So seeing that we only have 1 food right now, we're going to go ahead and sacrifice one of our dwarves, lead them off to greener pastures, and for some magical reason we're going to get a food to replace our lost wandering sheep. Our remaining industrious dwarf is then going to go to work out in the field. We're going to get another field tile. We're going to add it to the board. Remember, we're trying to keep the greens together, so we make the large fenced-in meadows so we can hold more animals, because the fenced-in meadows, the larger they are, the more animals we can hold in them, especially when we start adding the stables to them. And then the other half of that is we get to sow some crops. Luckily, we do have 2 crops, and we have 2 spaces for those crops. We're going to add 1 pumpkin, and we're going to add 2 grain. And then when the next actual harvest comes around, we're going to have a lot more food coming back to us, keeping that food engine running really, really well for the yellow player. That ends all the actions for all the players. Phase 3 is over. We move to Phase 4. All the dwarves get to come home now, and luckily we have the extra room for the new dwarf for our purple player who's been added to our family. Red and yellow still only have 2 dwarves, but that's okay because they're actually getting a little bit of their own engine going. And they also have plans for the future rounds. Now there's no Phase 5 technically in this game, but we do, in this round, but we definitely need to feed all our dwarves. Purple has 3 dwarves, so they need to spend 3 food. Red has 2 dwarves, so they spend 2 food. Yellow has 2 dwarves, so they also spend 2 food. This ends round 4. We now move to round 5. We're getting pretty darn close to almost being halfway through the game. We're now starting round 5, and our players need to start making some very cautious and very deliberate decisions for some of our players. There will be a harvest at the end of round 5, so that means that purple needs to have 6 food, red needs to have 4 food, and yellow needs to have 4 food also, but they know with the harvest they don't have to worry about foodstuffs at all. So the only person who really needs to worry about food happens to be purple, who right now only has 5 food if they include all their vegetables they have. The red player only has 2 food, so they need to find 2 more food. Luckily they have rubies, maybe they'll find another decision. Yellow doesn't really care because they have tons of vegetables they're going to get during the harvest, so they have no sweat, no worry at all. First thing we do is flip over a token if there happens to be one. We know that doesn't happen until round 6. Red is going to get their free wood resource thanks to their little wood supply dwelling. That's going to help them at the beginning of every single round for the next couple of rounds. We're going to reveal the next action space, and it's going to be the donkey farming action space. We now have sheep, we now have donkeys, and we now have tons of supplies, and we need to fill up all these supplies on the supply board. Just to make things fast, I'm going to do this off camera really quick. You understand the process. All these spaces are going to refill their supplies based on what they say. I'm going to do that really quick off camera. We're going to go ahead and start with the purple player's turn. The first thing they're going to go ahead and do is realizing they need food and also realizing they need some wood if they want to keep building their cavern infrastructure. They're going to go ahead and take this space, which is going to give them 3 wood, and it's also going to give them pumpkin, which is worth 2 food. They now have 2, 4, 6, 7 food potential if they need it, so they at least feed all their dwarves at the end of this round. Ends the purple player's turn. We're now going to go to the red player. Remember, the weakest weapon dwarf is the one who has to go first. He knows he also needs some resources. He specifically needs stone if he ever wants to start building the dwellings he needs so he can start getting some extra dwarves to help him work. So he knows that's the space he wants. Never hurts to have a little bit of coal. We don't need it quite yet, at least not what for our strategy is, so we're not going to worry about that too much. That's going to end the red player's turn. We now move to the yellow player's turn. Yellow also knows they need some stone, and they also need to start building their caverns because food is definitely not an issue for them, but we need stone and we also need wood because we want to start building some of these dwellings on our infrastructure right here on our caverns. Yellow player is going to go ahead and take the drift mining space, giving them some of the stone they're going to need to start building some of their dwellings. Easy decision for them. They're also going to add a tile to the board. They're going to make sure their tunnels line up, that way they can start building some mines on top of it. This also gives them some room for some dwellings. That ends the yellow player's turn. We now move back to the purple player's turn. Purple player knows they need stone. They also know they need a tile that's going to give them an extra tunnel. There's only one location left for them to take that tunnel, at least for now. So they're going to take the 2 stone they're going to get from that. They know they need the tunnel side, so they're going to put the tunnel down like this. They're going to match it up, so at least their tunnels match up. But they're actually going to go ahead and decide to turn this sideways like this. Their tunnels are still connected, which is what they need, but it's also going to cover up the +2 food, giving them extra food they need because they need to start feeding these dwarves who are going to start getting very hungry very quickly. We now move to the red player who, surprise, surprise, is going to go ahead and go on an adventure. We're going to go ahead and take this adventure space right here, which is going to give us 3 rewards to go ahead and choose from as long as they're level 9 or less. For our rewards, we're going to go ahead and take the pumpkin for food. We're going to take the pig, who doesn't know it, but he's also going to end up being food. Sorry, pig. And we're also going to take the weapon strength because we know the weapon strength is going to help us the most. End of the adventure, we're going to gain +1 for the weapon strength and +1 for going on the adventure. This dwarf is going to go from level 9 with his weapon strength all the way up to level 11. And this dwarf is going to go from level 5 all the way up to level 6 because we took that bonus, which is going to give all of our armed dwarves +1 weapon strength. That's the end of the red player's turn. We're now going to move to the yellow player's turn, who has some wonderful ideas on exactly how to increase their farm. They're going to take their dwarven worker, send them over here. And then this is where I'm going to realize that I actually miscounted my wood supplies, so I'm going to have to make a quick change of plans right here. We needed 4 wood for what we were planning to do. Unfortunately, I miscalculated, so we're going to need to get that 4th piece of wood in a most efficient way. That's going to help us the most. We're actually going to take this space for the 1 piece of wood for our 4th piece of wood we did actually need. Luckily, this isn't going to hurt us too badly. It's just going to slow us down just a little bit. Not too terrible. We're going to lay out the tile piece right there. That's going to be the yellow player's turn, and we're coming back to the purple player who still has one dwarf left to send to work. We're going to send the dwarf out, and we're going to start working on some ore mine construction. Ore mines are going to give us some victory points, and they're also going to allow us places to place some of our donkeys, and it can also help us get a ruby mine. This has to be placed on 2 tunnels that are adjacent and connected and touching each other. So we're going to place it right here, which is on top of 2 tunnels that happen to be touching each other. We're going to go ahead and get 3 coal immediately. Unfortunately, our dwarf is not armed, so we can't go on an adventure. So we know purple wants to start arming their dwarves starting with the next round. Red and yellow don't have any dwarves left to go. Purple is done with all their dwarves. That's the end of phase number 3 for all of our players. We now move to phase number 4, where all our workers get to come back home for the night. And I did want to do one thing with the red player I forgot about. The red player wanted to slaughter one of their pigs right here just to get some food. And I should have done that on their turn. I apologize, but I did want to get back up to 6 food. And it was not like the pigs were going to breed. Actually, you know what? Instead of double guessing myself, since I didn't make that decision, I'm going to stick with what I did. We're going to leave the pigs exactly the way they were because I didn't do it on my turn. Should have done it then. Not going to worry about it. We're going to leave things the way they are. That ends phase 4 for all of our players. We now move to phase 5. Since we have a green symbol here, we know there will be a full harvest this round. And not to confuse things, you can actually convert anything into food at any time. You don't have to actually do it on your turn. I'm just trying not to confuse this tutorial video too much. I'm just trying to show you exactly how the game plays. And I'm actually second guessing my decision. I'm actually just deciding to keep these 2 pigs for now. Even though they're not going to breed, I think it's actually going to be a good decision for me to keep them instead of converting them into food. So now we move on to phase 5 for the harvest. The first thing we need to do is we're going to go ahead and gather any crops that we may have. Unfortunately, that means only our lucky yellow player is the one who's smart enough to look forward to the future and do some proper planning of his gardens and making sure he had food for the future. Yellow player now basically has 6 food worth of crops. Still has some crops planted. It can always go ahead and reinvest those crops back in and start making more food. They're doing pretty darn good right now. It's now time to feed each of our players. We're going to go and start with the purple player. They need 6 food, which they can handle pretty easily. They're going to take their 4 food tokens. Plus, they'll go ahead and turn in 1 pumpkin to handle the other 2 food for a total of 6 food, so all their people are fed pretty darn easily. The red player is going to go ahead and feed their 2 people. They're going to need to feed 4 food. They don't have any, so we're going to go ahead and convert these pumpkins into 4 food, easily feeding our 2 dwarves. And then the yellow player needs to go ahead and feed their 2 dwarves also. We can hand in these 2 bushels of wheat and 1 pumpkin, 2 food worth 1 food total. I'm sorry, 1 food apiece. That's a total of 4 food. That'll easily feed all the yellow players' people, and everybody's fed. We now get to see if there's any animal husbandry that happens this round. For the breeding phase, the purple player doesn't have anything going on with their animals, so they can't do anything. For the red player, we have 2 sheep and we have 2 pigs, so we could breed them. Unfortunately, we don't have any place for the offspring. So since we don't have any room for the offspring, the animals just will flat out refuse to breed this round. We can't even send anything off to the slaughter in advance. So we're pretty much out of luck, but at least we have some animals for future rounds if we just plan properly with the red player. The yellow player is actually looking pretty darn good. We have 3 sheep. There's enough room in the pen. We can easily add 1 more sheep to the pen. Unfortunately, the pig is all alone. Nothing's going to happen there, but maybe next round we'll get something going on there. That ends the 5th round for all of our players. There's only 7 more rounds left to the game. We're now moving on to the 6th round and the final round for this tutorial video. So we're going to go ahead and make this really, really quick, but at least it'll give you an idea of exactly how everything happens during the entire game. Going to start the 6th round really quick. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to reveal the tile and figure out if we're going to get a normal harvest or not. We're going to see a green token, so we know there's going to be a normal harvest. Red is going to get their free wood resource from their nice dwelling that they built that's giving them some nice wooden supplies. We're going to reveal the top card, and we're going to get the Ruby Mine Construction card, which is looking very, very good to the purple player who has some mines already, and we can now start building a Ruby mine. That's going to end phase 1. We're now going to move to phase 2, while quickly off camera we'll restock all of these location spaces that do restock during phase 2. The purple player's turn, they know exactly what they need to do. They have a complete plan for their entire turn. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to send their dwarf over here to the forest exploration, which is going to give them the 1 wood they need, because they need 4 wood for their part of their plan. It's also going to give them pumpkin, which is going to be food or a resource they may possibly need to eat, but they're probably not going to eat it because, again, they also have a plan. We're then going to move to the red player, who's going to do a couple different things, also including the spending of their rubies, but they don't want to do it yet because they don't want to telegraph their intentions. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to send their level 6 dwarf off, and they're going to go ahead and do an expedition over here, which is going to allow them to take 2 adventures. They don't have the room for the ore mine, so they can't do that part of the card, so the only thing they get to do is do the 2 expedition part. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to choose the ability that's going to make all their current weapons go up by 1 level. So this is going to become a 7. That's going to become a 12, and for the second reward they're going to choose, they're going to choose a pumpkin, which is going to be 2 food, because we know we need to feed our dwarves at the end of this harvest phase, because there's going to be a full harvest phase at the end of this round. So this dwarf is going to go from a level 6, he's going to turn into a level 12 dwarf, or I'm sorry, level 8 dwarf. And then our level 11 dwarf is going to become a level 12 dwarf, which is perfect, and is going to work quite into our plan that we have for the red player. We're now going to move to the yellow player, who's going to go ahead and take their actions really quick, and they also have a very quick and very efficient plan. The yellow player is going to send their dwarf over to the donkey farming space, where they're going to go ahead and spend 4 wood to go ahead and buy a fence. On top of that, they're also going to spend 1 stone to go ahead and build a stable. And they're going to go ahead and place that fence right here on the board. And they're going to place that stable right here on the board right here. Now they don't get the pig quite yet, but as soon as they get one of these tiles down here, they're going to go get that pig, and they also are going to have a place to place that pig, and also be able to do some breeding when the harvest comes around, but I'll show you how that works in just a moment. They're going to go ahead and finish doing this by going and grabbing the donkeys, because it's an and then or action space. Since they did all the things up above, they now can go ahead and take their 2 donkeys, put them in the field where they can very easily fit. We're going to go ahead and take one of our sheep. We're going to go ahead and send it off to the retirement home, because remember, they're not going to the slaughterhouse. We're going to magically get some food that's going to appear out of nowhere, and then the purple player gets to take their turn. It's now the purple player's turn, who is desperately trying to get a food machine going, because they see just how wonderful life is for the yellow player. So they're going to send their dwarf over here to the slash and burn, which is going to produce a field and a meadow. We'll go ahead and place them just like this. The reason why we're going to do that is because we want that nice little pig, so we can send them off to the sheep's retirement home with that other sheep, so some food can magically appear somewhere out of nowhere. And then we're going to go ahead and sow some crops, because that's the other option we get to do for that action space. That ends the purple player's turn. We're now going to go to move to the red player, who's going to do a lot of actions involving the rubies and also going on an adventure. The first thing the red player is going to do is they're going to go ahead and spend 1 ruby, and they're going to go ahead and purchase a meadow. Then they're going to spend 1 more ruby, and they're going to go ahead and purchase a single tile field. Now, if you ever need to look at the cost for these, there's a card that comes with the game that tells you exactly what each item costs in rubies. Pretty much everything only costs 1 ruby except for a cavern and a cow. Cow costs 1 ruby plus meat, or I'm sorry, a food, and a cavern costs 2 rubies. Everything else is pretty much 1 ruby, making rubies a wonderful, very, very powerful wild card that you definitely want to have a lot of access to. Now that we're done buying our 2 quick tiles, we're going to go ahead and go on a nice adventure. And I'm sure those of you who played Caverna before can figure out pretty quickly exactly what we're going to do with this adventure. The first thing we're going to do with this adventure is we're going to go ahead and get a pumpkin, which is going to be a level 4 reward that our level 12 dwarf can easily accomplish. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and look at the back of this card, and we're going to look to see exactly what is available there for a strength 10 dwarf. We're going to see that a fence can be bought for exactly 2 wood instead of 4 wood, making them much cheaper to buy, and also something that we definitely want to have right now so our sheep can start doing some breeding. And we can leave the dog in the pen or we can send them off. It doesn't really matter. They're not doing anything in that pen at that time, so we'll just remove them from their spot on the board. And then for our final third action we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and choose the 12 strength action, which is to sow some of our crops, and we happen to have some pumpkin. So we're going to go ahead and sow that pumpkin because at the end of this turn there's going to be a harvest and we're going to get a return on our investment there, which is going to help feed our dwarves, which is a problem we've been having because we've been skimping by with the food. And at least now we know our sheep can at least do some animal husbandry to start producing some extra food. But we also know that pigs are worth a little bit more and when it comes to the food value, so we're going to go ahead and exchange the location of these two animals really quick because we want them breeding more than we want the sheep breeding because they are worth more food. So that's all three of our actions on our adventure space. We still have 2 rubies left and we still have some things we want to do. We're going to spend our 2 remaining rubies and we're actually going to buy 2 more meadows because we want to get those pigs and, you know, so they can go to the pig retirement home so that food can magically appear out of nowhere. Strangely, how that happens, nobody can ever figure out exactly how it does. Of course, things aren't looking as brightly for our red player as they are for our yellow player, who has a very easy plan and knows exactly what they want to do. They know they need wood. They know they need lots of wood because they want to start building dwellings. And they definitely have the cavern space for it, and they definitely have a future plan on exactly what they want to do for future rounds. That brings us all the way back to the purple player who's trying to finish their round and start taking a little bit more efficiency, trying to catch up to the yellow player who seems to be doing really well right now. Now it's time for the purple player to go, and I'm noticing I made one small mistake when they sowed their crops. I forgot to put out the pumpkin on their crops when they sowed them on the prior action just before. Go ahead and remedy that really quick, and then we'll take our final dwarf, send them out to the ruby mine construction, and we're going to go ahead and build a ruby mine. Now the nice thing about the ruby mine is not only is it going to give us 4 victory points, since we're actually putting it on top of an ore mine tile, it's also going to give us 1 ruby. And you saw how powerful rubies are. They're a heck of a powerful wild card. We can use that just about for anything, and we're not too worried about food or anything else quite yet because we got everything handled because we got 4 food coming in from the vegetables, and we got a pig who's going to mysteriously disappear one night. But at least Santa Claus will bring some food to go ahead and replace that poor missing pig. That ends the worker phase for all of our dwarves. They get to come home after a nice hard working day in the field, stick their feet up, enjoy, relax, kick back, and do what dwarves do after a hard day working in the field. I imagine they whistle or sing happy dwarven songs. Hopefully Disney's not going to sue me for that reference. Hopefully they won't. All the dwarves have come home for the end of phase number 4. We now move on to phase number 5 for a full harvest for all of our players. We're going to go ahead and do this in order since all of our players are going to get to harvest and get some resources back. We'll start with the purple players. They're going to go ahead and get 2 pumpkins back from their fields. We'll move on to the red players, also going to get 2 pumpkins from their fields. And then we're going to move on to the yellow players. They're going to get 1 wheat, an additional wheat, and they're also going to get 1 pumpkin, which is going to go ahead and cover a pretty good resource spread. It's also going to give them plenty of food to feed their dwarves. And speaking of which, it's time to feed all of our dwarves. The red player needs to come up with 6 food. That's pretty easy for them. They got 2 pumpkins. That's 4 food. Plus 2 more food. That equals 6 food. They're taken care of quite handily. The red player needs to spend 2 pumpkins for 4 food to feed their 2 dwarves. They're taken care of quite handily. They're not going to worry about that too much. And then the yellow player needs to spend 1 pumpkin, 1 wheat, and 1 food for a total of 4 food. And the reason why we did that is so that way we can plant these crops on the next round. Since we do have open fields, we wanted to keep our variety held back just for that purpose. Now we move on to animal husbandry. Purple doesn't have anything. Red has sheep, but no room for the sheep. They have pigs, and they actually do have room for the pigs, so we'll go ahead and add 1 more pig to the board. The yellow player, though, happens to be doing very well. They have 2 donkeys, and 1 donkey is going to come visit in the middle of the night. They have 3 sheep, so they're going to get a magical sheep at the end of the day, bringing them up to 4. Unfortunately, the pig's all alone, and there's nothing he can really do by himself. So that's going to end the harvest for round 6. That's going to end round 6 for all of our players. And that's going to bring us halfway through a game of Caverna with 3 players. This is going to end our tutorial video for here. I'm just going to go ahead and go over what would happen if this would be the end game. Obviously it's not the end game, but if this happened to be the end game, we'd go ahead and add up the score for all of our players. Every single player would get 1 victory point for every single farm animal and for every single dog they have. So for the purple player, that'd be 1 point because they have a dog, but they don't have any farm animals. For the red player, that'd be 2 points for the sheep, plus 4 points for the pigs, plus 1 point for the dog, for a total of 7 victory points right there. Then for the yellow player, it'd be 1 point for the pig, 4 points for the sheep, and then 3 more points for the donkeys, bringing them with a total of 8 victory points just for their animals. After that, every player is going to lose 2 gold for every animal, and that's only for every farm animal. Remember, dogs don't count as farm animals that they happen to be missing. So purple will lose 8 points because they don't have any farm animals. The red player is going to lose 4 points because they're missing the cow, and they're also missing the donkey. The yellow player is only going to lose 2 points because the only thing they happen to be missing is the cow. Each player is then going to get half of a victory point for every piece of grain they have, whether it's out in the fields or if it happens to be in their stock. So purple is going to get half a victory point. The yellow player is going to get 2 victory points, so they had 1 in the field plus 1 in their back stock. Then the player is going to get 1 gold for every pumpkin they have, so purple is going to get 2 victory points. Red's going to get 2 victory points, and the yellow player is going to get 1 victory point for their lonely pumpkin they happen to have in their back stash. Every player is then going to get 1 victory point for every ruby they happen to have, so purple is going to be the only lucky player who happens to have any rubies left. They're each going to get 1 victory point for every dwarf they have. That means 3 for purple, 2 for red, 2 for yellow. Each player is then going to lose 1 victory point for each empty space that happens to be on their farm board, which for some of our players, this could be a little bit painful. Purple player is going to lose 4 for every, because they have 4 open cavern tiles. They also happen to have 8 open forest tiles for a total of loss of minus 12 victory points. Our red player is going to get hit pretty hard for 6 forest, and they're going to get hit for 10 caverns for a total loss of 16 victory points. Yellow player is going to be doing the best, losing 6 for caverns, 2 for forest for a total loss of 8 victory points, if this happened to be the end of the game. After that, each player is going to get gold for any furnishing tiles they have, any pasture tiles, any mines, or anything like that. We look at our purple player and see that they're going to get 3 for their dwelling, 4 for their ruby mine, 3 for their ore mine at the end of the game. The red player is going to get 2 for having their wood supplier at the end of the game, plus they're going to get 4 for their nice fenced-in pasture for a total of 6. And then yellow players are going to get 4 for their first fenced-in pasture and 4 more for the second fenced-in pasture for a total of 8 victory points for everything they have on their game board. Players then need to look to see if they have any special dwellings that give them special victory points depending on exactly what they say. And those are generally things such as the milking parlor, which are going to give you special victory points depending on how many cattle you have at the end of the game. And that's going to be on top of the victory points you already got for having the cattle in the earlier scoring. So if you had cattle, you get victory points then. And then you'd also get victory points for having to have the milking parlor at the end of the game, for example. After that's done, after you've gotten all your victory points for your special parlors, every player is going to get 1 victory point for every piece of gold they happen to have at the end of the game. Players can add up all their victory points. Whoever has the most victory points is going to be the winner of Caverna. Expect your first couple games to average probably about 70 points. After you got a couple of games in your belt, you're going to start breaking 100 pretty darn easily, pretty routinely, unless you're playing with some really cutthroat players. That's Caverna the game in a nutshell. Hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for my full review of Caverna the board game.